Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Gazpacho Verde with Burrata cheese. That's right, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that I think this is probably the most delicious thing I've made so far this year, especially when you consider how fast and easy this was. And the bad news? Well, once again, I'm going to have to make you drive across town to the fancy grocery store so that you can purchase the awesomeness that is Burrata cheese. But if you can't or don't want to do that, or maybe you're lactose intolerant, keep watching anyway. Because even sans cheese, this Gazpacho Verde was incredible. And one of the coolest things about this recipe, pun intended, is just how few ingredients it takes to put it together. This really is little more than some cucumber herbs and a little bit of garlic. And speaking of cucumber, we have to make sure we get the right one. All right, what we need to use here is something called an English cucumber. And the difference between this and a regular cucumber is that the skin is much thinner, very mild, and completely edible. So what we'll do is we'll slice up our cucumber skin and all, and toss that into a blender, to which we'll add a couple cloves of sliced garlic, followed by our fresh herbs, and we're going to use two kinds. We will do a little bit of fresh oregano, plus a nice big handful of sweet basil. And then besides the herbs, we also need some seasoning. So we will toss in a little bit of kosher salt, as well as some cayenne pepper. A little bit of that's always nice. And then we'll finish up with a little bit of freshly ground black pepper. And that's going to be it for our solids, but we also have to add some liquids. And there's going to be 3 of them. So we're going to need a little bit of oil. Extra virgin is fine, but I would not go with one too strongly flavored. And then besides the oil, we're also going to need some vinegar. And for me, the perfect choice is seasoned rice vinegar, which is quite easy to find, but if you can, I'm going to give you some tips on the blog of what to do. And then last but not least, I'm going to finish up with some fresh cold water, which I guess is optional depending on your desired thickness. But I'm adding some because, as you'll see, I want this kind of thin. And then once we have all that set, we can go ahead and blend this until it's completely liquefied. So I'm going to go ahead and blend that on the highest speed for about a minute or two, until, like I said, it completely liquefies, and also turns into one of the most beautiful green colors you've ever seen. Look how pretty that is. I mean, you can't buy that color at the paint store. That, my friends, only appears in nature. And then once that mixture is blended, we're going to go ahead and strain it, or at least I am. Because what I'm going for here is a very light, very brothy texture. Right, you can certainly use this unstrained in its thicker form, but for me that does not work as well with the burrata garnish, as I'll explain later. So I'm going to go ahead and strain this, pressing everything through with a spoon or a spatula, and I'm going to keep doing that until all the goodness is passed through and I'm left with just about a quarter cup or a third of a cup of the most fibrous, toughest bits. Which again, you could totally leave in, nothing wrong with it. This is just all about the texture you want. And once our mixture has been strained, it should look something like this. Have I mentioned how beautiful that color is? I'm sure I have, but that really is stunning. And at this point, because we've been properly trained, we know we have to taste for seasoning. So let me give this a little taste for salt. And it was perfectly seasoned and unbelievably delicious. This just has the most beautiful, freshest, vibrant flavor you'd ever want to taste. And again, we accomplished this with just a couple ingredients. It really is amazing. And you're probably thinking, that sounds great, let's eat. We can't. We have to chill this until it's completely ice cold to get the full effect. So what we'll do is we'll wrap that up and pop it in the fridge for an hour or two to get it properly chilled. I mean, I don't want to be too harsh, but only a psychopath would eat a room temperature gazpacho. It's just not done. So we will chill that thoroughly before service. And then besides making sure our Gazpacho Verde is muy frio, as I said, you're also going to need to find some of this burrata cheese. Oh man, is this stuff good. And if you're not familiar, what this is basically a really creamy mozzarella cheese that's been stuffed with an even creamier mozzarella cheese, which you have to admit is pretty gangster. And since this stuff is way too soft to cut, what I usually do is just transfer it into some kind of bowl, and we'll actually use a spoon to serve it up, which, assuming our gazpacho is ice cold by now, we can go ahead and start doing. So we will ladle some of our Gazpacho Verde into a chilled bowl, and then we'll sprinkle down just a little bit of fresh chive, and then go ahead and grab a generous spoonful of that beautiful burrata cheese. And as we do this, you're going to get a great look at that super sexy interior. Some things you can just tell how amazing they're going to taste by looking at them. This is one of those things. So I took a scoop of that and placed it right down in the middle, which looks amazing except I covered up all my chives. So I decided to scatter a few more on. And then what we'll do to finish this is we'll sprinkle over just a little bit of coarse sea salt, which is not only going to season the cheese, it's also going to look amazing and provide a little bit of textural interest, since some of those crystals are actually large enough to crunch into as you eat this. And then we'll finish this up with a few drops of extra virgin olive oil, plus the absolutely mandatory piece of toasted bread. And that's it. Our Gazpacho Verde with burrata cheese is done. And I was not kidding in the intro. I really believe this is the most delicious thing I've made and eaten so far this year. Just such an interesting and enjoyable combination of taste and textures. I mean, we have that play between that thick, gooey, rich, decadent cheese, which is perfectly balanced by that thin, ice-cold, bracing, vibrant, fresh-tasting soup. It is just an absolutely fantastic combo. And as I mentioned, the toasted bread is mandatory. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do this. And you really want to be able to do that, okay? And by the way, in case you're wondering about the proportions here, I really am serving this more to feature the burrata, and actually using that Gazpacho Verde more like a sauce. But of course, you could take the complete opposite approach and serve up a nice big bowl of this soup with just a few little dollops of the cheese as a garnish. Totally up to you. After all, you are the Jane or John Doe of your gazpacho. But having said that, I realize that not everyone can eat cheese or will find this cheese. So as I've already mentioned, the soup really does work well on its own. In fact, you throw this stuff in a thermos and you bring it to that picnic where it's going to be like 120 degrees in the shade. If you do that, you'll be enjoying shots of one of the best cold soups of all time. So I really do hope you give this a try soon. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.